Hey guys, hopefully you had a good weekend. Had a lot of good emails, a lot of great questions. The difficult thing about teaching a class online is, you don't get that immediate response. Hopefully I answered most of your questions. I'll go over a couple of things that seem to be asked of me a lot. Kind of give you an example of what I mean by that in today's lecture. Also keep in mind that we have a test coming up. Clearly the test is going to be online. There's no option. It's going to be multiple choice. I don't know. It's probably going to be 25, 30 questions. I haven't written it yet. It's going to be timed. I'll have it up for 24 hours. So you don't have to take it immediately, but it's only up for 24 hours. Look at your syllabus. You'll see when the test is. It'll be timed. Clearly, you can use your notes. You can use the book. Next video lecture, we'll talk about the things that I want you to study for, or at least have prepared, and more importantly, things that I am not going to ask you on the test. Things that it's not that they're not important, but I'm just not going to ask you on the test. And we'll go over that next video lecture. So look at your syllabus. We got a test coming up, chapters 1, 2, and 3. And let's just kind of move forward into finishing up the part of chapter 1, move into 2 and 3. One of the questions that kept coming into me was, I made a comment that you have to, as an investigator, uh, look at whether a crime occurred, and that confused people. Because clearly, when we look at what a crime is, most of us realize at this point that a crime is a violation of a law. It's a statutory law. Society got together, they wrote up something that says we don't want you to do this. Clearly, that when you violate that, you have committed a crime. But as an investigator, one of the key things that I would ask of a new trainee in the field was, I would say, did a crime occur? What I'm asking that trainee is, talk to the victim in the crime scene and see if the victim wishes to prosecute. Listen to what I'm saying here. In most cases in our United States criminal codes, victims have the right to prosecute. They don't have to prosecute. Clearly, something happened to them. There are exceptions. We'll get to those. Even serious crimes like robbery and sexual assault. If the victim of a sexual assault, after I talk to that person, does not want to prosecute, then we say a crime didn't occur. Did it occur? Yes. But we're not going to be prosecuting somebody if the victim does not want them prosecuted. Are we going to document? Absolutely. Are we going to spend a lot of time making sure that, kind of like we were prosecuting? Yes. Because victims can always change their mind. In many cases, they do. But at that moment and at that time, the victim has the right. I mean, if you walk into a major crime scene where there was a robbery that occurred, and for whatever reason the victim doesn't want to prosecute, then at this point we're not going to move forward. There are exceptions. Clearly, with the case of murder, if you're not here, you can't decline whether or not you want us to prosecute. We also have exceptions with domestic violence. Clearly, in domestic violence, we not that we wanted to take that right away from you, but we are very we understand that the suspect in domestic violence many times intimidates the victim to not prosecute, so we prosecute anyway. So there's exceptions, but for the most case, remember, we're going to be seeing, does the victim want to prosecute, and move this forward. Hopefully that kind of clears it up. Let's move on to a couple of other things that most of you should already know. This should be just kind of refreshing your memory, which is really nothing more than classifications of crime. When I talk about classifications of crime, it's the way the United States decides that this is a major crime and it'll have a major punishment attached to it, or this is a minor crime with a minor punishment attached to it. We call these, in most states, and every state's going to be a little bit different, but in most cases, we call it a misdemeanor crime. A misdemeanor is a minor violation of a criminal statute. And in most jurisdictions, a misdemeanor crime generally will only get you up to about 6 months in a county jail. Remember, a county jail as opposed to a prison. When we talk about a felony in most cases is when we send you to the state prison for a year or more than a year because it's a major violation of a criminal statute. So when we're starting to talk about investigations, remember, I want you to put it into perspective. Are we talking about a misdemeanor crime, or are we talking about a felony crime? Most small departments don't spend a lot of time investigating crimes that are misdemeanors, with exceptions like domestic violence. They spend most of their time on felony crimes. Obviously, these are major events that occur. So keep in mind, keep that into perspective when we're talking about misdemeanors and felonies. A lot of states will have something in between. You know, in Nevada, we had a gross misdemeanor, which would get you up to a year in the county jail. So it's something kind of in between. But those are what we call, the classifications of crime. This is different than when we start to talk about the elements of the crime. Know that term. I'm going to ask you that on a test, without a doubt. As an investigator, it is going to be your job to prove in court, and hopefully you don't make a false arrest, because even before you make an arrest, I want you to show the elements of a crime. When we talk about the elements of a crime, it's those specific conditions that have to be met in order to make that crime have been occurred by that person. Every one of those elements must exist, or that crime did not occur. Now, some crime might have occurred, clearly they did something wrong, but it's going to be up to you to decide, did it meet the elements of the crime of robbery? If it didn't, it might be burglary. Don't make a false arrest. The elements of the crime are extremely important. We have lots of cheat books out there. You know, I wasn't expected to memorize at length the statutes in Nevada. The book would be about this big. There were clearly times in my career that I would have to break open the statutes and look and decide, when I'm at a crime scene, did the suspect meet all of these elements of the crime before I make an arrest? As a supervisor, many supervisors will have to actually drop charges if a police officer makes an arrest that did not meet the elements of the crime. It's extremely important as a detective. You're going to be going out and proving beyond an unreasonable doubt that the elements of the crime existed and that person did it. So understand what elements of the crime are. When we talk about the term MO, Mary Ocean, MO is modes of operation, or modus operandi. It's extremely important. Modus operandi goes back to what we were talking in lecture 1 with inductive reasoning. It's nothing more than what a geology professor teaches in the class about patterns of earthquakes, or patterns of types of climate change. We're looking for that same type of pattern and behavior from criminals. They tend to do the same things. You're looking for those modes of operation that a criminal does. What are they doing? You know, what type of crimes, at what time of the day? Are they doing it during the daylight? Are they doing it at night? What type of tool are they using? A getaway driver. You're looking for patterns of behavior. So when I talk in my lecture about MO, modes of operation, I'm analyzing, of all the things that I've seen in my past, this is what I have usually seen by that type of person committing that crime. So extremely important to know what MO means and why we use it as an investigator. Criminal intent, this is the purpose. When we talk about criminal intent, it's really trying to find out, did that person really understand what they were doing was unlawful, and did they do it anyway? Did they know what they were doing was illegal, and they went about it and did it anyway? So criminal intent is when we can show that they knew that this was wrong. So again, in many cases, we're going to try and perform a set of investigative tools to see whether or not that intent was there. Before we move on, because I like to do this, it kind of makes me keep you watching these lectures. I want you to, we're online, folks. You have to do it. I get it. So I'm going to tell you what your assignment is now. A lot of you are saying, why didn't you do it at the beginning? Well, I didn't do it at the beginning because I'm not a dumbass. I know most of you just look at the assignment and then quit watching. I don't want to hear myself. You don't want to hear me. I get it. Here's your assignment, which is due Wednesday. A lot of you sent me questions about, you said in your first lecture or second lecture that you can't be a detective until you've been a cop first. Well, that's true in local law enforcement. But a lot of you said, well, can I become an investigator without going to an academy? Well, I'm going to put this on your plate. This is going to be fun. We're going to kill two birds with one stone. What I'm going to assign to you is I want you to look at the federal side. Clearly, we have an enormous amount of federal police, federal investigative bodies out there. We have all kinds of different agencies, from the FBI to the civil, there's just so many. Your assignment for Wednesday is I want you to go online and research federal investigative bodies. I want you to find me 5. And I don't want you just to put down FBI. I want you to find 5 federal agencies. I want you to tell me what their primary investigative duties are, because most agencies have a primary investigative duty. This is what they tend to do. They let the local law enforcement do the majority, but this is why they're in existence. Find me 5. Tell me what their primary investigative duties are, because they are investigators. And more importantly, I want you to, and you can copy and paste this, I don't care, but I want you to research the minimum qualifications to get that job. If it's your lifelong dream to become an FBI agent, then put down FBI agent, number 1. I'm helping you out here. What is their primary investigative function? And then I want you to copy and paste, what is the minimum qualification to become an FBI agent? I want 5. That's your assignment. All right, let's move forward. Let's talk about a couple of things that your book briefly mentions. A lot of this is going to be refreshing the memory for some of you that had 1010. When we talk about problem-oriented policing, POP, problem-oriented policing, is nothing more than an investigative body at a police department getting together, looking at all of the information out there in a particular area that crime is occurring. We call this, this data mining. What kind of crimes are occurring? What types of MO are being used? And then you're going to try and find a solution to this problem. Problem-oriented solution is you're going to attack a specific problem. You're not just driving around in a black and white car answering calls for service. When we moved on from problem-oriented policing to community policing, the only difference between problem-oriented policing and community policing or community-oriented policing is that we get the community involved. Same thing as problem-oriented policing. You're finding a problem based on all the data, all of the research that you have done, this evidence-based policing, but that you're going out and enlisting you're enlisting the help of the community, whether it's pastors, priests, bishops. You're looking at all of the businesses to help you find a solution to this crime problem. That's what community policing is all about. So understand POP as an investigator. Most of you that get into investigative work, you're going to work at a station. Before you ever get into robbery, homicide, you're going to work for a station doing minor cases, and you're going to be doing a lot of POP, COP programs through that station. Before we leave this lecture, let's talk about, and the book briefly mentions this, civil liability. Civil liability or protection. I mention this to my classes because I don't want you to get into trouble. Clearly this job, I loved it. It gave me a lot of things to do. Every day was a different day. But you can get yourself into a lot of trouble. Just watch the news every day. We have some officer doing something every day that's going to get them into trouble. Most of you will look at the majority of these things and go, what a dumbass. And I'll agree. But there are things clearly that will get you into trouble that a lot of people don't think of. And I want you to write these down. Not only am I going to test you on these, I want you to never ever forget this. Number 1, when you choose a department to work for, and number 2, while you're working for that department. These are the kind of the criteria that I'm going to give you as advice before you choose to work for this police department. Please do this so you do not get sued. Civil liability means they're coming to you and suing you for your ATV, for your boat, for everything you own because you have done something wrong, and they can do that. So number 1, I don't want you to ever work for a department, anyone, that doesn't have clear department policies and procedures. I want them to have a department manual that clearly says this is what you can do and this is what you cannot do. If you choose to work for a department, and you can see them all over the country, these small departments that don't have clear policies and procedures, then you're going to be going out there and doing things, and you're going to get yourself into a lot of trouble. Number 1, clear policies and procedures. I want it written down. But more importantly, and remember this is something I had to learn later on in my career. Just because there's a department manual that says you cannot do this, what you are doing in the field and what your supervisor is allowing you to do, That is the department policy. So even though the department says in their book that says you can't do this, but every one of your sergeants knows that you're doing it and they're letting you do it, that is the policy. So that written document's not going to protect you if you're violating it and they're letting you get away with it. Remember that. Second thing is, there must be continuous training. Every department you work for, if they're not giving you training every month, whether it's firearm, investigative, defensive tactics, knowing the laws, the statutory laws, if you're not doing that continuous training, you're going to be sued. If you arrest my client and I'm an attorney and I can show that you haven't been trained in anything for 4 or 5 years, I'm going to have your ass. I'm going to sue you because it is on you to be trained every month on what your job is. It's too dangerous as a nation to let law enforcement have this much power without training them. You must have a department or work for a department that has continuous training. Third thing is proper supervision. If I can clearly show that you were operating out there working without anybody watching what you're doing, I'm going to sue you. When I say this, I'm playing the devil's advocate. Remember that, because I've faced that many times in my career. And you will be sued if they can show that you don't have proper supervision. Work for a department that has a clear chain of command. Police officers, sergeants, somebody that is supervising, because police officers are no different than high school kids. They do stupid shit when they get out there, especially when you get a lot of them together. There needs to be supervision. Last one, and I hate that I even have to say this, number 4, which is make accurate reports. We're going to talk about this as we get into report writing next chapter. But accurate reports means no bullshit. You don't lie about anything. Do not put your reputation in your career on the line and throw it out the window because you make things up. Catching bad guys is not as important as your reputation and doing the right thing. Please, don't make things up. You must document everything the way it happened. Don't fabricate. Don't put anything in a report that did not happen. Not only will you be prosecuted, but you will spend time in prison in some cases. You can't make things up. False arrests are not what we're here for, folks. So these are the clear things that will keep you from being sued if you just find those departments, and they're all over the United States that you can work for. So it's extremely important. Before we leave and we move on to report writing, because we're going to talk about that on next video lecture, as we move into chapter 2 and 3, a lot of you have asked me if you could get an older book for the class. I don't mind. And the reason I'm saying that is because clearly in chapter 2 and 3, depending on what book you have, the technology for documenting a crime scene is going to change every day. I mean, we're moving forward. I mean, the digital cameras and video equipment that we use every day is going to change. The minute the book that you have says this is the way we do it, next week we could change based on technology. A lot of the stuff that we're doing now is based on drones. We use drones on everything to do all kinds of aerial photography. So what I'm saying is, read in your book the types of cameras and video technology that we use, but keep in mind, I'm not going to test you on that. I'm not going to expect you to know anything about how to diagram a crime scene. Your book goes into at length on diagramming crime scenes. Not going to do that. I'm not going to test you on that. Read it. I do want you to know, however, that everything that you document in a crime scene, which you write down on a scratch piece of paper, that has to be saved. I can pull that into court. Everything that you write down, even on scratch paper, when you diagram a crime scene, whatever you do, I can use that in court, meaning you have to show me what you did that day. Everything you write down on scratch paper or in digital format can be used in court later. So it's extremely important. Documenting and writing is going to be about 25% of every investigation. Everybody watches TV and thinks it's all about chasing down bad guys. A fourth of what you're doing is documenting. You're documenting the crime scene. You're documenting everything you do. So keep in mind, it's extremely important. For one reason, and one reason alone, this is my best advice I can give you. I've got a lot of students that have been hired on by police departments, and they keep asking me, how do I get to the detective bureau? Well, one of the main ways you get to the detective bureau is those detectives that are currently working are going to be pulling up your reports. when you're going to these calls for service, the domestic violence, whatever you're going to, you're writing down things on paper. They're looking at your documentation to see whether or not they think you can write legibly and that they can understand what you're putting together. So what I'm trying to say is, if your skills at writing are not there, go use, we have many resources here at SUU. You can go use the Writing Center. You have to get better at writing down your thoughts. You're clearly going to be seeing a lot of the elements of the crime. You're clearly going to be hearing and seeing a lot of things. You have to be able to put that in written format. It's extremely important. So as we move on, documentation is extremely important. We're going to talk about that next time. What you do in a crime scene, what you don't do in a crime scene, that type of thing. Right now, just understand that documenting is extremely important, about 25% of what you do. Having said that, just remember you've got an assignment due. If you have fast forward this lecture to now, you're not going to know what the hell that assignment was. You have to back up and look. I'll put it online, that it'll be posted online, your assignment. Remember, have it to me by Wednesday. Most of you have turned in your other assignments, great. It's not going to be difficult to get a good grade in this class. Just stay on top of the lectures. Send me questions as they come. I don't mind, because there's a lot of things that I might pass over, very quickly that that you might be wondering why. So send me a question. See you next time.